I can tell you, I'm capable, I'm trained to diagnose people. Rarely do that. If there's no reason for me to do it, I'm not going to do it because it's just another label, okay?
Right.
But what I do say is regardless of what their circumstances are, and I've seen some pretty horrific, traumatic experiences that people have relayed to me, difficult circumstances that they've had to go through, marriages that just didn't work out, all sorts of childhood trauma, for example. I've never met anybody that couldn't find hope, encouragement, and move their life in a way they want to.
Wow.
No exceptions that I've run across.
Welcome back. Dr. Gray Otis with us tonight. My name is Aurora Nino, and we're going into chapter 7. What you are saying is a recipe for life success. Let's dive in. So my first question is, how can we create a sense of wholeness as a person?
We find that people feel very good within themselves if they pay attention to basically 4 areas of how they're conducting their lives. We've talked about some of these in some detail. We've got some more to cover in future chapters. But the basic idea is that a person has a kind of a sense of their self-belief identity wrapped around these 4 basics. The first one is to believe, and you can imagine that comes to key core beliefs.
Right.
And
okay.
most importantly, that most fundamental core belief, I am worthy to be loved.
Right.
And then we want them to go on from there to better understand themselves and understand others. But this idea of understanding, and we talked about that in the last chapter, of how our emotions really have these underlying feelings. If we can kind of grasp that, then we kind of get a better feeling for, how these emotions arise. And I didn't explain it in the last chapter, but I think it's important. We kind of see the negative emotions as mad, sad, and anxious. And the 4th group is to be glad. We all like to be glad. But mad, sad, and anxious are often referred to as negative emotions. They're really not negative. They're just warning emotions. They tell us that something's not working for us. Sometimes not working for others too. And if we understand that in that concept of the second basic, we're better able to understand ourselves and then also able to understand others. And that leads us to better regulate our emotions. We don't control them, but we can regulate them just like we regulate a thermostat.
Okay.
The third area is to connect. And all of us live in a world where from the moment that we came into being in this life,
we have to connect.
We have to have connections.
Right.
And we want those connections to be uplifting, positive, supportive. We've talked a little bit about how great relationships can occur, and we'll talk more about that in a subsequent chapter. But the idea is that we want those relationships to work for us, and we want them to work for the other person. So connection is so important, vitally important. And the last one is to imagine. I always like the idea of what Disney coined the term the Imagineer. Disney had been working in cartoons and even live action films. But basically, when you put a film on the screen, it's 2-dimensional.
Right.
And then he came up with a crazy harebrained idea to build an amusement park called Disneyland. And he realized that he needed people with real imagination to take his ideas, which were in his head, and other ideas that would come from other people, but then to create them in 3-dimensional space, to engineer them. Yes. So he came up with the term Imagineer. And that's really all that we're doing throughout our lives. We first envision or imagine something, then if we run it, we act on it. Or we engineer, we make it into reality.
Yes, that is so true. Where anything that was created had to be imagined first.
Exactly. And the problem is sometimes we get stuck in imaginations of stuff that doesn't really work for us. So here, when we talk about imagine, we're talking about imagining a life that's full of purpose and meaning and satisfaction and how we go about creating that. So when we bring those 4 basics together, we have a person that really feels pretty decent about themselves. They go through life with a little bit more self-assurance, and they're out there kind of making things happen, not only for themselves, but for others as well. And so we talk about this in the concept of real success. We can have all the money in the world or be powerful or whatever,
Yes.
but are we really in that classification where we can believe that we're worthy to be loved, that we understand ourselves and others, that we can really connect with others, and that we are engineering through our imagination our own best desired life story?
Wow. Wow. And just, I mean, we think of people sometimes, the most successful people, and they may have a lot of money, and at the end of their life, they can't take it with them. And yet they may be successful in one regard, but they may be very, very empty in a lot of other regards.
Yes.
And that's what I think these 4 things are really trying to get to the root of. So, can you tell us the difference between self-worth and self-esteem?
Yeah, I think this is so important. And again, these are kind of my word choices, so if people want to define these things differently, that's perfectly okay. All right. But I kind of look at self-esteem as what other people tell us in terms of feedback that we believe about ourselves. And so somebody pats me on the back, says, gee, what a great job you've done. And that's feedback that I'm getting from somebody. And if I believe that that's, valid feedback, I'll say, yeah, that's part of my self-esteem.
Okay.
But unfortunately, the other side of that coin is also true. If somebody gives me negative feedback, why did you do that? What were you thinking? If I take that kind of information into myself, then it starts to lower my self-esteem. It's an external source that's telling me something that I accept as accurate in terms of my belief about themselves. So much self-esteem is unfortunately based on what other people are, quote, conveying to us or telling us or demonstrating to us. And if it's not positive, it can really take our self-esteem into a nosedive.
Right. And then you see all these kids that are, being bullied in person or now online bullying. And I'm sure that's rampant of just really affecting people's self-esteem when they're being treated like that.
I think it's one of the most difficult and horrific aspects of life now, particularly since online media
Yes.
and all of this cyberbullying, not to mention just regular bullying.
Right, right.
And it really, people start to question their value. They question, gee, there's something must be wrong with me. And it's only because somebody's acting out in a way that's very insecure.
Right.
I'm sorry, people that bully are people that are insecure. But that doesn't help the person. And, it's so important because children get their basic concept of themselves primarily from their parent for the first several years. But as they get closer and closer to those teenage adolescent years, they start to get their feedback about who they are from their peers.
Right.
And what we want is to, when people, as they go through these different developmental stage, to get to the better understanding of who they really are within themselves. And that's where we get the term self-worth. Self-worth is what we tell ourselves, not from what other people have said, but what we've said within ourselves that we believe is accurate. And again, like self-esteem, it can go up and it can go down.
Right. Depending on what we tell ourselves.
And as you can imagine, negative core beliefs do not add to our self-worth in a positive way.
Right.
And so as we work with people, we want them to understand that, yes, it's all right to get feedback from others, but the most important feedback is the self-talk that we give ourselves.
Yes.
And we want that to affirm a positive sense of ourself, a self-belief identity that's constructive and accurate, and that is based on positive core beliefs.
Wow. I feel like if we can really train or teach others to do that, your self-worth can combat any amount of negative, negative impact from an external source. Right. And you see that in kids. You see some kids and someone looks at them wrong and they shatter. And then you see some kids and they are outright being bullied and they have just this inner core strength. And they're not affected by it.
Aurora, I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly right. And so we want to instill this very early on, primarily through parental feedback and other people that are important in the individual's life, for example, teachers. But we want that to kind of get to the point where they're starting to see themselves that way, not because somebody said so, but because I told me so.
Yes. Yeah, that I am the one that creates my self-worth, not anybody else.
Exactly.
No, nothing of what anyone else can do can affect my worth as a human.
Exactly. And, we talked about this previously. If we take 10 little children from around the world, which one of them is not worthy, that doesn't have value and worth in and of themselves intrinsically? Yeah. Well, I think that's true for all of us. Sometimes our behavior doesn't match up to that, right. But it doesn't mean that we've lost who we are in terms of our worth.
Yes, yes. So if you have someone that has a very low self-worth, how can you help them create a new vision of themselves?
And that's the operative word. And we're back to imagine and envisioning. And I think it's so important. And again, the biggest key single factor there is core beliefs, understanding the negative ones, figuring out, as we talked about, how a person can become aware of them, how they can come up with and devise an alternative desired positive core belief, how they can act on that, and then practice it. And over time, that becomes their core belief that replaces the negative core belief. Mm-hmm. And it is always more accurate and more constructive. And so when we look at how a person sees their worth, it really is totally related and directly linked to how they see themselves in terms of their core beliefs and how they see themselves as their total accumulation of beliefs that are positive, we hope.
Right. Wow. Okay, so can you give us an example of someone where their challenges have been able to be constructive in creating this better for them?
Yeah. In the book, we have the story of Emily, not her real name, but Emily was raised by a single mom, and she was the oldest of 3 children, if I remember correctly. Her mom was not well physically. And at a very early age, therefore, Emily became kind of responsible for younger siblings. Mm-hmm. And she kind of relished that, as a matter of fact. She got a good sense of her self-worth, if you will, by the fact that she was pretty competent. And a lot of times she did the things, her mother gave her guidance, and she loved all 3 of the children, her mother did. But Emily, a lot of times, was given a lot of freedom to make some choices and to be supportive of her younger siblings, to help them with their schoolwork, for example, to make sure that they got their breakfast in the morning and had some lunch to take to school and so on.
Wow. Very responsible. She had to become very responsible probably at a very young age.
Really did.
Wow.
And she did very well by herself. In addition, she was competent in academics. She became fairly skilled in bookkeeping, and she was well on her way to a very successful life. And then she met her future husband, Roger, and he was just one charming guy. Good looking, charming, very successful in sales. And she could really envision that she would have a wonderful
relationship.
Great life. Yeah, great life. Yeah, this great guy. And her younger siblings were doing pretty well at that point. And she was ready to move on. But it was kind of almost a whirlwind marriage. They got together pretty quickly and married pretty quickly.
Okay.
She said it went so fast, and she was still working. So her future mother-in-law planned most of the wedding, took over a wide number of the details.
Wow.
And so in a very short order, Emily found herself married to Roger and kind of delighted. And one of the things, just as she had kind of taken care of her mom and her siblings, she was just really pleased to, take care of him. Yeah. Have that meal ready for him and make sure that things were special for him. And it was all well and good for a month or 2 or 3.
Oh, no.
And then she ran into this circumstance where no matter what she did, Roger was either disappointed or really kind of miffed with her.
Sad.
Because, again, she wasn't meeting his expectations. And she never felt like she could do it. And she always thought, well, if I just try harder, things will work out better. But for whatever reason, it didn't work out better for Roger, and Roger was quick to criticize her. Not only that, but so was her mother-in-law.
Oh,
And so
dear.
she was kind of almost under constant barrage of, what's wrong with you? Can't you see that this is the way this is supposed to be done?
Oh my goodness. And she's so capable. So it's
Yes.
like, what was she doing
Yeah.
wrong? I mean, I bet that was incredibly stressful for her.
Beyond incredibly stressful. And again, we're talking now about external validation or lack thereof in terms of her self-esteem. And it just started to go down and down and down.
No.
And she felt like there was something seriously wrong with her. She had never kind of doubted herself before, but now she kind of thought, gosh, with all of this, and by the way, a lot of times these criticisms were very logical. Why didn't you see? But unfortunately, she came to the opinion that there was something inherently wrong with her because she couldn't be getting all of this comments from Roger and her mother-in-law if there didn't have to be some validity to it, because it did kind of make sense. The other thing is that we see in those kinds of relationships, she became more and more disconnected from others. She demands on her time. She was still doing some work and trying to make things right in the home front, but just never succeeding. Fortunately, at one point, she decided that she had to get somebody else to weigh in on this and to give her some other perspective. And, actually, when she went to see this counselor the first time, it was basically, well, this person will probably confirm that really is something wrong with me.
Oh, sad.
By contrast, though, the counselor said, no, there's nothing wrong with you. After she was able to tell her story, the counselor said, no, you're just dealing with two individuals that have problems of their own. And one of the things you need to understand is you're very intelligent and very resilient, very resourceful, have a strong ability to bounce back. And that was out of the first time that she met with this counselor. Well, she went back after that, and the counselor went through with her as to why she had these kind of beliefs when she was younger, very positive core beliefs,
Yeah.
but how they had become eroded by her relationship with Roger and his mother.
Ooh, and I mean, through this course of this book, we've really talked about how lots of people start with negative core beliefs, and and then you can make them positive. And this is almost the inverse. She had this strong sense of self and everything, and yet as an adult, they were just being, like you said, eroded at. Like if we're not careful, this can happen to us at any point in our life.
It's almost like the metaphor that somebody can be chipped away at.
Yeah.
Until there's nothing left of them.
Oh, that's so sad. So what happened?
Well, that didn't happen with Emily.
Good.
As she began to understand the circumstances, and it's kind of, again, interesting to use the power of empathy to understand that Roger really was a very troubled individual, that he had the hallmarks of success, but she could tell in other aspects of his life that, for example, he was a successful salesperson, but he didn't hold down a job for much longer than 6 months at a whack. And she knew that. She also began to understand where his mother was coming from, that his mother felt somewhat threatened by her, and that she was somewhat insecure, and she was trying to hold on to her son and keep him in a wonderful relationship with
her.
Yes.
And she felt threatened by by the in-law.
Well, unfortunately,
wife.
as we said earlier, some committed relationships just don't work. And Roger was not willing to do anything about that. He was ever more convinced that there was something wrong with Emily and that she needed to be fixed. And her counselor was saying, no, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to fix. But there are some things that Roger has as characteristics, and we're not here to blame him on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's pretty clear that he has no interest in changing.
Right. And I think, what you've said before, it's like if both of them are willing to invest and to work at it, it could have likely been solved.
Absolutely.
But he sounds like he just was not willing to change.
It takes two people to make a committed relationship work. And particularly if one of them sees himself not in a partnership as he didn't, it just is going to be, well, virtually impossible for that situation to continue to, no way that it can thrive. And it really isn't going to exist in any way, shape, or form that is pleasing to either one of them.
Wow.
And when Emily realized that, she recognized that she needed to get out, get on her own. She went back, increased her education, became very skilled in bookkeeping, and went on with her life in a very positive way. And one of the things that had been a problem for her is that she did have a baby, but neither Roger nor his mother was very happy about it. But once the baby was born and she decided it was time for her to kind of strike out on her own, he convinced her that she was a terrible mother and that he would sue for full-time custody.
Oh.
That scared her to death. But again, working with her counselor and ultimately with a good attorney, she was able to work that out. The positive core belief switched from, the negative core belief switched from, I'm a terrible mother, to I am a loving, caring mother, and my baby needs me.
Yes. And obviously she's very capable when she was able to help raise her siblings
Yes.
all growing up. Wow.
Yeah, once she made that connection, there was no turning back, and she was able to move forward with the life that she wanted to have, and to have a wonderful relationship as she was raising her little kiddo.
Yes, yes. Okay, so just a question on all of this. At what point do you believe people need to seek professional help?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we don't have one answer. But the long and the short of it is, many of us are going to work through the vast, vast majority of our challenges and problems in our life. But there are going to come times for almost everybody, and we know statistically that virtually everyone is going to deal with some kind of serious mental situation. Yeah. So from a mental health professional, and by the way, let me clarify, there are what we would refer to as mental health therapists or psychology therapists. They're largely grouped in one of four categories. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I'm basically doing the same work as a psychologist. Okay. And of course, that's another group, the licensed psychologists. They typically have doctorate degrees, whereas the other three, including myself as a licensed clinical mental health counselor, we have a master's degree and are licensed at that level. The other two are the licensed clinical social worker. They have a really good expertise in understanding resources that are available in the community, but they also are good therapists. The last group of the three master's degree ones are the licensed marriage and family therapist, and we all know that their title kind of expresses what they do.
Right.
So they are more focused on relationships, but that doesn't mean that they can't be really good therapists in a broader context. Okay. We see that primarily people that have had traumatic or chronically distressful experiences, some will be able to work through those on their own, but many just need some support. So we're looking for somebody that really has a specialization.
That expertise.
This. Okay. Exactly, in dealing with trauma and chronic distress. So again, what are some of the conditions? Often I see people that have recurring dreams. Some of them have flashbacks. All of them have pretty negative core beliefs about themselves if they haven't been able to work through those. So a good mental health therapist can help almost any of those individuals work through those kinds of things if they have that expertise. Yeah, and they can, we kind of like to say, help the individual resolve those kinds of experiences. I always like to say, I don't heal anybody. I just help people heal themselves. Now, there are a couple of other specializations that are important to consider. In fact, there's more than two. Okay. But they're all medically trained. So we have all known about psychiatrists. These are all doctors, medical doctors, and they specialize in mental health conditions. Typically, because of their training, they are focused on very short appointments. They normally don't do much therapy. They're mostly working on brain issues, and they are, along with these other three that we're going to talk about, are the ones that can prescribe. So the psychologist, except in a few states, and all of the mental health therapists that are licensed at the master's degree do not prescribe medications. So along with the psychiatrist is the regular medical doctor, doctor of osteopathy, the DO. They are authorized to prescribe medications. Typically, they don't do therapy because they're just not trained in that. So, but they, a lot of times, somebody's feeling depressed and they go to their family practice doctor and he'll say, yep, you do have depression.
Yes, you
so,
have this.
and they usually will prescribe an antidepressant. And hopefully, we like to say that since none of the psychiatric medications cure any mental disorder.
I think that's so important for people to realize, because lots of people, when you're in that pain, it's what can I take? And this is going to solve the problem. And it's really not curing the problem.
That's right. They don't have that capacity. But in our society, we're so used to saying, well, I feel a little pain, so let's get the ibuprofen. Or if that doesn't work and I've got a migraine, let me get a migraine prescription medication. And so a lot of people have a lot of confidence in, nothing wrong with that. But it's not the whole picture. And so normally when we're seeing any of those kinds of issues, we would also like to combine that with, for example, medication, but also with mental health therapy.
Yes.
So we want both of those, if at all possible. We're even finding out now some interesting studies that people with migraines quite frequently, not in all cases, but quite frequently have trauma in their background. And if we can resolve the trauma, it's interesting that we see the migraine frequency go down very significantly and sometimes totally disappear.
Wow.
So it isn't just our mind psychology, but it's not just our brain, medically speaking.
Right.
It's
both.
It's both.
It is both.
Yeah. The other two specialists that are medically trained is the psychiatric nurse practitioner or the nurse practitioner. Typically today, they started out with master's degree, but now they almost all have a doctorate degree. They're not doctors, but they come up through the nursing ranks. And they're very skilled, and if they've been trained as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, they're very skilled in therapy as well. And they typically combine the best of both. They'll spend time with an individual to really try and understand them. And then if they find that a psychiatric medication would be helpful with reducing some of the symptoms, they can prescribe as well. And the last group, which is the newest group, is the physician's assistant. And again, some of them do kind of specialize in psychiatric circumstances and usually under a supervision of a regular doctor. But in some cases now, in some states, they're acting very independently. And they've always been kind of independent, to be honest with you, even though they're working with a doctor. The physician assistant can prescribe medications. And those that are getting additional training in psychiatry may be able to offer some kind of therapy. Typically, though, all four of those, the psychiatrist, the primary care physician, medical doctor, the nurse practitioner in some cases, and the physician assistant will probably from time to time refer out to a mental health therapist that are doing the psychotherapy approach, and that's their primary focus.
Yes. I can see why there's benefits to both, right? To making sure that there's overlap there.
And then to go back and finalize your question, when should you see a therapist? The classic answer to that is when your situation and conditions or symptoms are so challenging for you that they're actually impeding your ability to function in your life day in and day out. So we're all going to be depressed from time to time. We're all going to have anxiousness from time to time. Right. It's interesting. We're all going to feel a little bit bipolar. We throw that term around. Or OCD. We throw that term around. That doesn't mean that we have a mental disorder. But if we're going through our day-to-day life and we just are not where we know we could be, and there's something that's just kind of getting in our way, that's when a mental health therapist and somebody that's a prescriber can provide some support to us. And if it's a mental health therapist that really understands trauma and chronic distress, as well as all of the other disorders like compulsive behaviors, addictions, they can be a tremendous help. And it's getting us over the hump. The medications can reduce the symptoms so we can deal with things a little bit more effectively. The psychotherapy is there to help people really get themselves back to the place that they want to be, or to get to a place that they never thought that they could. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that was very helpful. So in learning about all of these, is there ever a time that therapy is not a good option?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think that somebody else is going to provide the solution. And we're pretty resilient as individuals. We can do our own study. Certainly, we have the opportunity to tap into a wide variety of different self-help books, for example, or just Googling stuff. But I do think that a lot of times we're looking for a solution outside of ourselves when really the most important solutions, I think, come from within. And that's why I say I don't cure anybody. I just help people find the resources within themselves to make their lives go in a direction that they want to. I think there's a lot of people that think that they've got to turn to somebody out there.
Right.
And usually that involves spending money.
Yes.
And, when it's appropriate, that's fine. But a lot of times people just need to kind of see what can they do for themselves. Now, again, if they're really feeling impaired, then they probably need to see a therapist.
Right.
But I'd be a little bit cautious about a lot of online services that, and there's some good resources, don't get me wrong, but I think they're like everybody else. There are good car mechanics and mechanics that maybe don't know much about your car.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true for therapy. I think the same thing is true for medical support. So is nothing wrong in the medical world of getting a second opinion. I'd be very concerned about somebody that's quick to diagnose, but really doesn't have much in the way of encouragement or hope. And that means to me, if this was a therapist, it's time to get a second opinion from somebody else. And I think it's really important. One of the things that we've recognized in psychotherapy, that basically about between 25 and 30% of the effectiveness of the therapy outcome is based on the relationship between the therapist and the individual. So if the individual doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't trust for some reason, or just doesn't feel like this particular therapist understands them or has much support for them particularly in terms of giving them some ideas to think about and maybe to experiment with, I think it is time to look for another therapist. I've had people say, well, I went to this therapist and he or she was really nice, but all they did was listen to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. And maybe that's all right for some people. But for other people, they need a little bit more context.
Yes.
One of the things that we are all trained in is what is referred to as reframing. And it just simply means that somebody says something and then we kind of turn it around and say, let's take a look at this in a different way. So somebody said, well, I'm back to square one and I'm just not capable. I heard that very recently. And I said, can we stop for just a second? I don't mean to interrupt you. I know you've got something you want to say. But are you really back at square one? And are you really not capable?
Oh, yeah.
Well, again, those are core beliefs. And immediately, as a therapist, I think I have the responsibility to kind of highlight that and to find out what is accurate and what is positive. And we went on to talk about, interestingly enough, a spiral staircase. And this is a metaphor that was shared with me many years ago. He said, we're all on a spiral staircase. And the question is, are we
going
up
or down?
or going down?
Yes.
And he said, and the important thing is not whether we're going down or not. It's whether or not we believe we can turn around. And then it doesn't matter where we are. It only matters if we're going up.
Wow.
And I really like that. Because we're all on a staircase.
Yes.
And sometimes I do, turn around and start taking a few steps down. But I'm not at square one and I'm not at the bottom. Right. And all I have to do is recognize, that's not working, Gray. Turn around.
Let's figure this out.
Start taking those steps up. And sometimes I need a little support from somebody else. It might be a therapist. More commonly, it's my partner. Yeah. And sometimes it's God. But the long and the short of it is, it's not where I am on the staircase. It's the direction in which I'm going. I think that's true for all of us. And I think that's so hopeful, so encouraging. And that's why I try to highlight with the people that I work with.
Yes. And I think with all the professionals out there, if they are helping people see that, then that's a good sign. If they're telling people, nope, this is who you are. Here's the label. You will never be able to change. This is, really just grounding them in the victim mindset, then that's not benefiting them, right? And I think that there are times where you need to find the right counselor for you, and that's very important. I've also seen people that will go from counselor to counselor to counselor to counselor to counselor because they're looking for validation and they're not looking to change. Yeah. And I have seen, so it's really important to realize if you go to counseling, be willing to change, and change isn't normally comfortable, right? It's uncomfortable, but that's what you're seeking to go to a counselor for, is to change your life in some form or another. And that's going to take work, right?
It's going to take work. And sometimes that work is just as what you said, it's not real comfortable, but it's amazing to me that you can work through things very efficiently, fairly quickly, and you don't have to stay in discomfort.
Yes.
And if a person is really willing and able and ready, we always like to say, go to war. You want to do this, you're willing, you believe that you're able to do this, and you're ready to work on it.
I have not heard that acronym yet. That's really cool. That's
cool. So, and I can tell you, I'm capable, I'm trained to diagnose people. Rarely do that. If there's no reason for me to do it, I'm not going to do it because it's just another label, okay?
Right.
But what I do say is regardless of what their circumstances are, and I've seen some pretty horrific, traumatic experiences that people have relayed to me, difficult circumstances that they've had to go through, marriages that just didn't work out, all sorts of childhood trauma, for example. I've never met anybody that couldn't find hope, encouragement, and move their life in a way they want to.
Wow.
No exceptions that I've run across.
Right. That's remarkable. That's remarkable.
I think it is a testimony, a witness, if you will, of the inherent resilience and strength that we all have. And going back to that basic core belief, if there was somebody that needed help, we would want to help them. Even if we couldn't, we would still want to help them.
Yes.
And that's who we really are, always have been, and will always be that way.
Yes.
So with that as the core and the most centered core belief that I'm worthy to be loved because of that, everybody can move up the stairway.
So as we conclude this chapter, is there anything that you want to summarize before we end?
Well, two aspects. And we've talked about the fact that there are skills that are really important for us. So we call them the key skills. And again, we've talked about two of them tonight. The first one is how to be more whole. And as we said before, when a person is whole, they believe that they are worthy to be loved. They understand themselves better and understand others more effectively.
Right.
They are able to connect with others in ways that works for them and for other people that they care about. And they have this ability to imagine or envision their life going forward. And we like to say these are kind of circular because as we go through all four of them,
they lead
right back
to
around.
Each other. Yes. Okay.
And so for Emily, just looking at that last part, during the time that she was, kind of in the midst of that marriage circumstance that just wasn't working, she could not imagine her future. But as her counselor brought her back to, yes, you're worthy to as your counselor brought her back to, yes, you are worthy to be loved. And she started to say, yes, of course. That was true with my mother. It was true with my siblings. It's true with the people I work with.
Right.
Yeah, that's who I am.
Right.
And as he explored with her how she could better understand herself, as the counselor worked with her so that she could better understand herself and also, in this sense, understand Roger and his mother, she began to get a more accurate perspective of who she really is and always has been and always will be. That led her to say, yes, I can connect with people. I always have. I always will. This is who I am.
This is who I am.
And of course, that led to an expansion of how she was seeing herself, or using her imagination to really capture the future that she really wanted. So this is being that whole person, and it does describe this kind of thing, that things go around and around if we constructively and accurately look at it from that vantage point.
Yes. And the people that I see that are truly feeling hopeless, they're not choosing to envision something different.
It's not only that they're not choosing, but sometimes they just can't.
Yeah, they just can't, see that. And so it just shows the power of being able to just try to envision something different, to be able to pull yourself, through this. I mean, that's amazing.
Sometimes we need help. That's why there are counselors. That's why there are good friends.
Yes.
Hopefully sometimes that's people that we're in committed relationships with, or other family members. But nobody goes through life alone. And we do need that connect piece, so that when we do run into some kinds of circumstances that are challenging for us, that we've got somebody there that can give us some external feedback and reaffirm our own self-worth.
Yes. Wow.
And that's that second key skill. That's that second key skill, to keep coming back to who we are, our worth as individuals. I like to say everybody brings so much to the table. Everybody is unique, but everybody has certain abilities that I'll never have, and that's okay. But we can share and really enjoy one another and appreciate one another. And as we do that, we can enjoy and appreciate ourselves more in terms of who we are.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I hope anyone that's listening can really understand their true self-worth is innate, and it doesn't depend on what anyone else says to you or about you. Their self-worth is intrinsic, and I love that. So thank you so much. We're excited to dive into the next chapter.
Well, thank you.